My worry is, if you buy this argument that the mullahs are all bad, everyone thinks for themselves.
All bad. Come on.
A lot of them are bad.
Hyping that.
A lot of them are bad.
Don't be a typical journalist.
A lot of them are bad.
Don't do that.
A lot of them are bad. I read 2 of your books. They didn't come out very well.
Don't polarize.
A lot of them are bad. We think for ourselves. We don't allow them to monopolize power, end the power game, etc. My worry is, if I'm in Al-Qaeda, that's very appealing. I don't need to worry about classical law, scholarship. I just make up my own religion. I give a fatwa saying kill the Jews.
And they do. And they do. That's exactly what they are doing.
It is a big challenge today in our sensitive, progressive Western societies to say that maybe other societies or other religions don't share our liberal values. And this is something that is seized and taken advantage of by the Islamists, by the jihadists, by the Muslim Brotherhood, by those who want Sharia law in Western countries. Because whenever someone comes out and speaks up about this issue, he's silenced and said, you are a racist, you are an Islamophobe. And who is the master of this playbook? Mehdi Hasan. You may have heard of him, the man from India or something who was born, grew up in Britain, who always goes on the shows to say that Islam is this amazing religion of peace and the real racists are in Britain and the United States, perhaps. And he tried this trick here with this woman who is an author of a book critical of Islam. Let's see how that discussion went. Here we go.
Welcome, Irshad, to Head to Head. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's kick off this discussion with perhaps the most important question, because a lot of people know you from your first book, which was called The Trouble with Islam Today. What is the trouble with Islam today in your view?
In a word, Muslims. We are the trouble with Islam today. We have allowed tribal culture to colonize the faith of Islam. But the good news in saying this is that we are also the source of reform, meaning that we can literally draw inspiration from our own scripture, from the Quran, in order to reform our hearts, our spirits, and our beings. And one passage that has been profoundly inspirational for me is the one that states, believers, conduct yourselves with justice and bear true witness before God. And here is the revolutionary part, even if it be against yourselves, your parents, or your relatives. This is a call for moral courage. This is a call to stand up when others want you to sit down. And it is part of what makes Islam as a faith revolutionary in the 21st century, not just in the 7th.
It's fascinating to hear you say this, because a lot of your critics, and you have a fair few critics, especially within the Muslim community, their objection to you over the years, my understanding is that you say there's a problem with Islam, and a lot of Muslims say, and I would count myself amongst them, who say there's a problem with Muslims, certainly with many Muslims, definitely need some form of reform, change, revolution, whatever you want to call it. But Islam is the religion. Don't bring Islam into it. Where do you stand on this?
It is a problem with Muslims. However, Mehdi, let's ask ourselves, what is Islam? Islam isn't some theory. Islam is a way of life, and it is we Muslims who define what that way of life is. And so if we are stopping one another from expressing our diversity, then the message we are sending to each other, not just to the rest of the world, to one another, is that this is Islam. I don't buy that. Tribal culture is not Islam, but we have made ourselves the problem with Islam.
Miriam Francois Sarai is also here. She is a journalist, a broadcaster, an academic. What do you make of what Dr. Haladi has
Actually, I think part of the problem is that they are going back to those verses. I've just been teaching a course on religious extremism, and the extremists are, generally speaking, politicized individuals who are operating in a framework where the dominant lexicon is Islam. That is the idiom of the society in which they operate. And therefore, in order to make themselves audible to the population, of course they express themselves by reference to Islam.
This is a specialist area. When I have a medical issue, or a legal issue, or a financial issue, I will go to the experts. We're talking about spirituality, we're talking about religion and faith, we're talking about the hereafter. And I wouldn't want to allow lay people to start reinterpreting.
Seeing the experts, you're doing DIY Islam.
No, spirituality
don't
cannot
misunderstand me.
I do very much understand, and I've heard it over and over and over again. And I remember in Indonesia when this point was made to me, and a scholar certified scholar sitting right next to me, said to the person making your point, sir, he said, if you're going to go as far as to compare spirituality to medicine or accounting, well, in medicine, there is a principle called first do no harm. You can actually sue a doctor for doing harm. Maybe we should be able to sue mullahs too for doing harm.
Why are you against expertise,
The
specialism?
Quran, you know, it's interesting because the reason I can embrace the Quran is that, 3 times as many verses in the Quran call on Muslims to think and rethink and analyze, as you've pointed out, rather than submit blindly. So by that criterion, actually all of God's creatures, Muslims especially, are called upon to keep thinking. It's not about expertise. It's about remembering, sir, that you are not God and I am not God. And therefore, none of us can claim to have the, quote, right interpretation.
Would you get rid of all scholars, imams, mullahs, as you call them, anyone, get rid of all of it?
I would help equip a new generation of Muslims with the self-confidence to recognize that they are allowed to think for themselves.
No, we understand thinking for ourselves. I've been thinking for myself for 33 years. I didn't need anyone's permission. I'm asking about specifically coming up with laws, understanding verses of the Quran, understanding traditions of Islam, understanding what, ethics, Islamic ethics are. How can every single person just make that up as they go along? Surely in every religion, in every society, in every field of life, you defer to experts, people with specialist knowledge,
well, again,
which you and I don't have.
Well, wait a minute. As we found out with the 2008 global economic meltdown, which was not predicted by the experts, experts often aren't experts, okay? So let's stop playing the power game, Mehdi. Let's stop playing on the terms of people who call themselves experts and who like to use their power as a cudgel, as a sledgehammer over everybody else.
Who are the people who know, in your view? Who are the people you ask?
Who I ask?
Yeah.
If I'm thinking for myself, but I will tell you,
everything.
Hold on. Certainly.
Everything.
But wait,
you don't need any help in understanding the Quran, the tafsir, the interpretation, the history, the ethics, the context.
One of the most common questions that I get from young Muslims is about interfaith relationships. I'm a Muslim, I've fallen in love with a non-Muslim, is there any hope for us? And they usually say something along the lines of that my parents and their imam insist that Islam, stops interfaith marriage. Is that true? Rather than me giving them my personal interpretation, what I've come to realize is that they're actually not asking about themselves, they're asking about their parents. They need an argument that will convince their parents that love is borderless.
What my worry is, if you buy this argument that the mullahs are all bad, everyone thinks for themselves.
All bad. Come on.
A lot of them are bad.
Hyping that.
A lot of them are bad.
Don't be a typical journalist.
A lot of them are bad.
Don't do that.
A lot of them are bad. I read 2 of your books. They didn't come out very well.
Don't polarize.
A lot of them are bad. We think for ourselves. We don't allow them to monopolize power, end the power game, etc. My worry is, if I'm in Al-Qaeda, that's very appealing. I don't need to worry about classical law, scholarship. I just make up my own religion. I give a fatwa saying kill the Jews.
And they do. And they do. That's exactly what they are doing.
And aren't you validating them? Because you're saying from a liberal perspective, we make it up as we go along. And they, from an extremist perspective, say, let's make it up as we go along. You're almost empowering the very people you claim to be fighting with.
They don't make it up as they go along. They take it from the scripture, Mehdi, like the charter of Hamas that takes the quote from the hadith that says the day will come where the trees and the stones will say, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him. They are precisely following the scripture and what the mullahs that you claim she is demonizing tell them very, very often.
So that's a very... I think
Why
that's an excellent point. I've heard it before, and I've said it before. That's an excellent point. Good in theory, wonderful in theory. But again, I live in the world of reality. And the reality is that people like this already exist. And this is why progressive thinkers, and I wish there were more people in positions of religious authority who would take that power and actually democratize the ijtihad, so that young people know that they are worthy of thinking about these issues for themselves, yes, in a non-violent way, but actually developing that personal relationship with Allah rather than believing that they are here to worship Allah's self-appointed ambassadors.
And just to be very clear before we move on, just for the viewers, you talk about ijtihad. How do you define ijtihad?
Ijtihad is Islam's own tradition of independent thinking, of critical reasoning, of debate dissent, and reinterpretation. And yes, I have heard 1,000 times that only certain people are allowed to exercise ijtihad. But even that is up for debate.
Well, let me just come back to the point you made a moment ago. You said, let's not play the journalism game, let's not generalize.
The
polarization game. It's a very good point. I'm glad you raised that, because I reread both your books and I found myself nodding through a lot of the pages saying, I agree with this. She's right about the way women are treated in a lot of Muslim countries, a lot of Muslim communities. She's right about violence, predilection for violence. She's right about a lot of areas, ignorance, critical thinking, a lot of things. But here's where you and I differ. I read your books and I see only polarization. I see you painting in primary colors. It's all black and white. It's West is great, Muslim world is all backward. They don't think for themselves. They're all automatons, to use your phrase when the program opened.
Well, then I have to say, then you're reading those books from your particular lens.
What do I do with this sentence? One sentence. Under the Arab code of honor, Muslims are taught to abdicate our individuality and accept our fate as the property of our families. Well, all 1.6 billion of us. I don't do that. My parents didn't do that. None of my friends do that. When you say 1 billion Muslims need permission to think, you're not just talking about Arabs.
I'm saying that there is too much fear still among a new generation. When I went to Cairo 5 years ago even, okay, a massive protest against the Mubarak regime, young woman comes up to me and she says, Irshad, I know you get a lot of questions from young Muslims. Here's mine. She said, I have fallen in love with a Jewish man and I don't know how to tell my parents. She said, here I am putting my life on the line to achieve political change in my country of Egypt, but the more frightening thing for me is to speak with my own family about love. Frightening thing.
Why not say some women in Egypt need the permission to think freely? Why say 1 billion Muslims? Why feed into the Islamophobes you mentioned earlier by implying that 1 billion Muslims do not think for themselves?
Well, there is quite a lot of them who don't think for themselves, and there's quite a lot of them in societies who are afraid to say what they actually think or what they want to say, as she gave the example. But you're trying to paint anyone who has criticism as putting everyone, every single person down to the last under that brush, accusing the people who bring up legitimate criticism of being racist. Same old playbook again and again.
Again, when you read my point in its context, you understand that I am giving shades of gray and nuance, but of course, like any person who's making a particular argument, you make particular statements in order to drive the point home.
But if you're trying to win over Muslims and reform the community, when you say things like, we have to own up to, quote, Muslim complicity in the Holocaust.
Yes. Yes, as
Muslim complicity.
As there was
Am
Christian,
I complicit in the Holocaust?
I think that anybody who denies that Muslims played a very important role in the Holocaust
A Palestinian mufti,
passive.
I think, is your example.
More than just a Palestinian
what about all the Muslims who died fighting Hitler? What do you do to their memories?
What I do is I write about it in Allah, Liberty and Love. That's what I do.
Agreed. So you disown the statement from your first book that said Muslim complicity?
No, just as I do not disown the notion of Christian complicity in the Holocaust. I'm simply saying that we Muslims,
you break everything down to Muslim.
Muslims have a lot of catching up to do in the dissent department.
One thing we didn't get to talk about, time permitting, is, for example, you hold views that most Muslims don't hold, the vast majority. For example, you believe the Quran is an imperfect book, a flawed book, a contradictory book. Very hard for you to round up Muslims to speak out on that issue because they just don't agree with you.
Sure. Of course there are lots of Muslims who don't agree with me, and Mehdi, there are lots who do, even on this point. But surely you would acknowledge
that there's a big contingent of Muslims who agree with you on the theology.
Surely you would acknowledge that it is far less frightening to speak up in support of the perfect Quran than it is to speak up about contradictions within the Quran.
That wasn't my point. My point was that
but that is the point. That is the point.
My point is on violence. Lots of Muslims agree with you. On the Quran, most don't. Therefore, it's very hard for them to come and share a platform with you when they...
How can you say that most don't when we don't have a world in which it is safe for people to speak up about their real view of the Quran, Muslims included, or Muslims especially? How can you say that most don't?
Irshad Manji. She was born in Uganda to an Indian family and she grew up in Canada. That's why she has these positions. She grew up in a liberal, secular society and she wants Islam to be more liberal and secular and dissenting. But that's not what most Muslims want around the world, and that's not what Islam really teaches you. Certainly not in Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan, Palestinian territories, and many, many other places around the world. And this is the problem, because as she said, and this is the most important point she made, no democratization of the space of discussion, of the absence of fear in discussion. People are terrified to say anything that is not in line with what the society wants, especially women in those societies. In the Arab honor code that she talked about, which is a real thing, and she said specifically in the Arab honor code. And then he says, you're saying 1.6 billion Muslims. No, she said in the Muslim Arab honor code. She gave a specific example, which is undeniable. And we see it here in Israel, in the Bedouin families, where a girl shames the family and then they murder her. It's a real thing. So this is the problem, and I saw it as somebody who traveled in the Arab and Muslim world, and I have a book coming out about it very soon, and you can see it in my videos and in the reactions to my video as an Israeli Jew in the Arab and Muslim world. And it's the thing that if you go in the street and you can meet rando people who will be tolerant and say maybe some nice things, but it has no expression in the public space. Why? Because of fear, because the public space doesn't tolerate dissenting views. And you can't enact any proper change in the society if people don't feel free to speak out about issues in the religion and in the society. Introspection. Where she said, Irshad, we have a lot of catching up to do in the Muslim world on introspection. They have zero introspection over there. She gave the example of the Holocaust. It wasn't just Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Palestinian Mufti. He also conscripted Bosniaks from Bosnia into the SS, and all the ones in North Africa who loved the Nazis when they came in and were very excited, and the Vichy regime, to go on board with the discriminatory laws and also ratting out the Jews that were sent to the death chambers. Yes, even from North Africa, that happened. And the Farhud in Iraq as well, which was after the attempted coup over there with the Nazis, where they went and they slaughtered the Jews. Yes, the Muslims had something to do with it. Yes, the Muslims kicked out all the Jews from their countries after 48, which they never acknowledge. No introspection after October 7th. No introspection. What could we have done differently? Only us, the victims. Only everyone else is racist. That's what Mehdi is promoting. She's promoting some accountability, individuality, free thought, discussion, because she lives in Canada, so she's able to do that. And I wish her the best, but I think she's being over-optimistic in what Islam is able to achieve under its current conditions, or what is inside the books and what wins over what. Because at the moment, you have millions and millions of people who live in fear. They have to toe the line, and there are certain positions that can't be challenged. You can't talk about it. You can't debate. You can't change. You can't introspect. You can't improve. And we see the results in the Middle East. We see the results. Not very good. So please don't be one of the dumb liberals in the West when you see those results as well and say, oh, it must be America's fault. No, it's their fault. It's their fault. They don't know how to improve as a society because they don't have that freedom and critical thinking to improve as a society. They don't have that ability to look backwards into the past and say, this wasn't the way to go. We needed to maybe change and improve. They don't have that. So they don't improve and they stay behind. And I don't think it's going to change that much anytime soon.